Hello and welcome to the Storytelling with Puck podcast. We will, as always, start with a story.
Last night, I dreamt I went to Manderley again. This is the famous opening line from Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, and it's all it takes to transport me to Cornwall and the Gothic setting for this story about wealthy widower Maxim de Winter, his first wife, Rebecca, the second Mrs. de Winter, and the housekeeper at Manderley, Mrs. Danvers. I was first introduced to Daphne du Maurier's work at school when Jamaica Inn was one of our set texts. I wasn't quite so keen on that story, but still wanted to discover more of her books. Rebecca was the next one that I read, and it remains an all-time favourite. Daphne du Maurier created psychological thrillers long before they became a thing. Rebecca was actually first published in 1938, and it has never been out of print. Like so many other classic tales, it continues to be read and enjoyed time and again. It's a book that I have reread several times. The last time was in 2012, when I was giving out copies of this book as part of World Book Night that year. It's well overdue for another read. I find it interesting in the story that we are never actually told the first name of the second Mrs. de Winter. It's an intriguing way of ensuring that Rebecca's power over the Manderley household is shown to be all-encompassing. There have been a few adaptations of Rebecca for large and small screen. There's the classic Hitchcock adaptation starring Laurence Olivier as Maxim and Joan Fontaine as the second Mrs. de Winter. The ending was changed to make Rebecca's death appear accidental. More recently, a Netflix adaptation was released starring Armie Hammer as Maxim, Lily James as the second Mrs. de Winter, and Kristin Scott Thomas as Mrs. Danvers. It's well worth a watch, even though in this adaptation too, the ending was changed. And by the way, Kristin Scott Thomas is absolutely brilliant as Mrs. Danvers in that adaptation. Anyway, if you want to know what really happens at the end of Rebecca, well, you'll just have to read it yourself, won't you?
We will indeed. We will indeed. You've built up the tension very well there, Catherine. Thank you so much. Now, I can't wait to talk about that a little bit more and also to introduce our listeners to you and find out more about you. But before we do, we'll have a quick introduction to the Storytelling with Puck podcast.
You're listening to Storytelling with Puck, the podcast designed to show the power of stories in life and in business. Stories connect us on a deeper level, which is why we'll be sharing, chatting about, and feeling the impact they have on every one of us. Your host, Stefano, is the founder of Puck Creations, and we work with your business to define a clear, consistent, relevant brand which stands out from the crowd. We use that brand to create content that makes your audience think, feel, and take action. Visit puckcreations.com to find out more.
And before you visit Puck Creations, well, are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin with an introduction to the magnificent Catherine Williams. Catherine, let's open chapter 1, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me on your podcast, Stefano. It's a pleasure. My strapline is making books beautifully easy to read. And I work with book coaches and independent authors to help them get their books ready for publication. So books have always been a big part of my life. And I didn't actually start out my career in the publishing world. I started out in the voluntary sector. But once I'd got my foot in the door of a small publishing company, I knew I'd found my happy place for work. And 25 years later, I'm still working on books.
Amazing. You are, I think, the perfect guest in that case for a storytelling podcast. That's maybe a good place to start. You said that, books and reading have been a huge part of your life. Do you remember the first book you ever read or that was read to you?
Can't say that I do, no. I can remember reading The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and that is totally my all-time favourite children's book. Although you can read it as an adult as well, and it's just as good.
Mm-hmm.
In the original, I used to imagine that I was Lucy going through the back of the wardrobe into Narnia and having all those adventures. So yeah, brilliant book. It's funny, because when I was a child, I never realised that it was a Christian allegory at all. But I don't think you need to read it in that way at all.
No, I agree with that. I think you can take it as it is on face value, or you can or you can take it as a Christian allegory. But I don't think it matters. I think that it's actually the feelings that it gives you, that excitement, the imagination it sparked, the idea that every time we open a wardrobe, I feel like so many children, I think through all generations, actually, I think children are still reading it to this day.
Yeah,
have exactly that same feeling, though.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you certainly identify with one or other of the characters. You could be the naughty one, Edmund, who got involved with the White Witch and couldn't resist the temptation of the Turkish delight. But yeah.
So that was something that always comes to mind as reading as a kid. You don't remember the first book, but you remember that as kind of one of the most powerful books in your favourite children's book. And then as you got older, were you the kind of child who was just reading at every single gap between the things that you kind of had to do in life, or how did you navigate that world?
Pretty much. I can remember as a younger child, one of my favourite things to do was to go our weekly visit to the library. My mum was an avid reader, so we'd go to the library every single week, and she'd get like 6 books out and read them all within the week. But it was the chance to choose new books, I was never a famous 5 reader. It's weird. I was a secret 7 reader.
You'd already started the divide off.
Yeah. All those adventures. And I can't honestly remember what they were about now, or the names of the characters. But it's funny. But I was always, the proverbial always have my nose in a book.
I know that feeling well. I remember as a kid, similarly to you, going to the library, and there were restrictions on the number of books you were allowed to take out.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and it used to really upset me, because I knew that I could read way more books than they would allow me to take out from the library in the space of time. And I was encouraged to as well. And luckily I had a family who really encouraged me to keep on reading. And I remember, I think my mum maybe got to know one of the workers at the library, one of the librarians. And eventually, because I always brought the books out, brought them back in time, could tell a story about the books because I'd read them, they allowed me to take out a few more books. They broke a few rules, which I'm not sure is a very typically librarian thing to do, but
probably not. No.
Probably not. But I must have been as cheeky of a child as I am as an adult. So
yeah. No, it's funny because one of my first ambitions was to be a librarian. I thought it would be an absolutely wonderful job to be surrounded by books all day, and all you had to do was put the books back on the shelf and stamp the new ones out, and all the rest of the time you could just sit and read.
yeah. I'll be honest, I still like that idea quite a lot. It would be pretty wonderful. Unfortunately, as we know, lots of libraries are closing down or have closed down already.
Yeah, that's right. It's very sad, really.
It is. So. Still, there's lots of reading material around, and there's still lots of vigour for books, and there's a lot of. We'll come to what you're doing now in a short while, because there's a lot of further for business type books and for non-fiction books at the moment, but I guess. How you got to where you are. You said at the beginning that you didn't go straight into the publishing industry, but you started in the voluntary sector. What were you doing in the voluntary sector?
My first job was actually as a PA to her job title was Policy Development Officer at the Mental Health Foundation in London. Yes. So my role was obviously to support her, and it was typing up her letters that she dictated. We didn't have computers then. It was on a electric. It wasn't actually an electric typewriter, thankfully, rather than a manual one, which is what I learned to type on.
Are you a fast typer?
Yeah, fairly. Yeah.
Experienced pro. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going.
No. So her job was essentially putting on conferences about mental health issues for professionals in the field. And we ended up also setting up a grant giving committee around substance abuse, so that other charities working in that particular field could apply for grants to the Mental Health Foundation and
Amazing.
Get funding towards work to help people who, unfortunately have fallen prey to drugs or alcohol or solvents or any other substance that one might abuse.
Yes, yeah. That's addiction is it's such a challenge, and I mean that's the understatement of the year. It's an amazing thing that you were doing. What got you to go down that path in the first place? What made you decide to get into that work?
It's a combination of things. My dad was an accountant, and I actually did my degree in accountancy, which surprises quite a lot of people because it's something that I never pursued. It just seemed one of those things that seemed like a good idea at the time. But in my final year, we did a marketing option, and I then did my thesis on marketing charities. And that was because my mum had worked in the voluntary sector for most of her working life. She was the director of a couple of different charities. That's kind of where it came from. So I did this thing about marketing charities, which led me to look for my first jobs in the voluntary sector. And I then, after the Mental Health Foundation, I went to the Royal National Institute for the Deaf as PA to the Director of Fundraising.
Amazing.
So the marketing stuff came in quite useful there.
Yeah, I can imagine it did. And tell me more about that, actually, because I find charitable marketing or marketing for charities to be some of the most powerful that there is. I think that businesses can actually learn a lot from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Something I see within the sector actually is probably more stories than in any other business sector to market charities. What did you learn? Firstly, going into that world and doing the course, and then when you were actually working there as well, what did you learn about that, and how is it helping you now?
Gosh, I think it's essentially that it doesn't matter what sector you're in, you need to understand marketing if you're self-employed, and you can't be afraid to put yourself out there. But yeah, you're so right about the stories, because especially with charities, I think where they've helped individuals or groups of people with a particular disability or a particular problem in life, and how they've actually helped to, they can't necessarily solve that problem, but they can help to make life easier. And you certainly see that in the BBC Children in Need and comic relief things, and you actually get to see the difference that the money has made to those people who've been affected.
Yeah, I agree with that completely, and it makes a lot of sense. And was there ever I imagine there had to have been a challenge with ethics when it came to sharing some of those stories and which stories you could share, and sometimes I guess it's making sure that the emotional welfare of the people stories that you're sharing is looked after as well. Was that kind of always a dilemma, I guess, on how much you could and couldn't share. And
it was always, you had to get permission from the people involved to share their particular story, either through getting them involved with it, or using pseudonyms, or it's the story rather than necessarily the individual that it affected. That was really important.
That makes sense. And I think that then does show you some parallels to how we can use storytelling in marketing businesses too. Sometimes it's not necessarily, as you say, the individual company that you helped, but it's the way that you helped them. It's what the results were of what you did. And especially, when we're talking about case studies, or I prefer the term client stories, when we're explaining. There's the simple formulas for stories about the problem, for case studies and client stories about the problem, or the solution, and then kind of the end result, where they are now off the back of it. But I often find that something that's really missing with case studies is the emotional factor, and that's what turns a case study into a client story, in my opinion. It's how does this all connect with the audience and the person who's reading it? And that's where I actually think having a background of reading so much fiction and enjoying so much fiction can really help. Would you agree with that kind of hypothesis at all? Or
I think I would, actually. Yeah, definitely. Some books that you read, you literally get so engrossed in them that a few hours passes by and you think, oh, okay, where did that time go? But you've read half the book already, and because the author has used their skill to really pull you into that story and grab you and just make you want to read on. And that's always a sign of a good book, in my opinion.
Me too. And that's actually something that I really, really try and persuade my customers and Puck Creations customers to do, is we try and persuade them to use their personality, use their slightly different style to kind of grab people and bring them in. It doesn't need to be sell. It doesn't need to be look how amazing we are. It just needs to be something that builds a relationship with them and gets them on board. I think not all of our listeners will know you, but people who do know you would say that I think you actually do that exceptionally well with the way that you promote your different businesses, and they're both linked in terms of the subject matter, but you draw people in really well with what you do. And I often wonder, because we know each other to an extent, but we don't speak that often, so I haven't asked you about this, but I often wonder how much your background helps you with all of this side of things, and it seems like it might be.
I think it definitely helps. I've been running Chapter 1 Book Attraction just over 4 years now. Certainly at the beginning, I had some assumptions about where my work was going to come from, which didn't pan out at all. I assumed it was going to be from, more from traditional publishers, but that hasn't turned out that way at all. I'm definitely in the realm of helping people to self-publish.
So sorry, actually, I'm going to control myself. I was going to ask you questions about that, but I'm quite liking this build up to where you are now. So let's go back for a second to you were working, still working in the charity sector. And was that your last job in the charity sector, working as
the Royal National Institute for the Deaf? Yes, it was.
Okay.
But the weird thing about that was I started using a program called PageMaker, which was the predecessor to InDesign, which is like the industry standard now, because I was creating promotional materials for regional fundraisers. They were putting on events and other things, so we needed tickets and posters and all that kind of thing. And I really loved that part of the job. It was brilliant. But then I had a career break for having my children, who are now 30 and 29, which astounds me no end. But once my younger child had started at preschool, I knew I had to find something else to do, because I was be, just bored sitting at home
Yeah.
in between the school runs. And it was just the biggest stroke of luck ever. We had this tiny little company, literally 5 minutes walk from where I live, called Babel Publishing. And I noticed when I was walking past it one day that there was a sign in the door that said assistant required. I thought, okay, I'll pop in and see what that's about. And as it turned out, they needed somebody who knew how to use PageMaker. So that was it. I was in, and I ended up staying there for 11 years.
Wow.
Yeah, we were helping authors to self-publish their books in much the same way that I'm doing now. But this was, 25 years ago.
I imagine self-publishing wasn't so popular 25 years ago.
It definitely wasn't, and it was very much denigrated as vanity publishing, and it wasn't proper publishing, and there was a lot of negativity around it. But we actually provided a real service to people. Quite often it was local histories, biographies, memoirs, family histories. And a lot of them, they literally wanted 100 copies of their book that they could give away to their family and friends. So that was the service we provided. And
So it was self-publishing, but not for the idea, or most of the time, not for the idea of making lots of money out of the book. It was much more of a personal.
Yeah, very much so.
It's interesting because you mentioned the word ego there earlier, and I can see how sometimes it might have been egotistical. I want to have, I want to have my words on paper. It doesn't matter if they're any good. I just want to show off the world that I've got. But I also imagine that for lots of people, when they're doing something like that, which is kind of, a biography that they want their family to see, it's not about necessarily how good the writing is, how well formed it is, etc. It's more about, I want you to see the story of your family and to see my story and to be able to pass that through to generations. Were there a lot of people like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But you did mention a stigma there, and it's definitely something that I've heard too when it comes to self-publishing. And as you say, especially when you first started in that industry, would you say that there's still a stigma around self-publishing?
To some extent, probably, yes. There are some who would say, it's not properly published unless you've got a contract with a traditional publisher. But I think it's that, the digital age has made it a hell of a lot easier to self-publish.
Yeah.
When I first started out, we were literally, if pictures were going to be included, we were literally leaving a space on the page. They would get printed out, and then the photos that had been supplied by the author were physically stuck in place. And then the printer would be having to, it was called camera ready artwork, because the printer would have to photograph each page and then assemble them in the right order to print them.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it was quite a convoluted purpose. That's the wrong word. Process.
Yes.
Before the digital age came along and made everything a lot easier.
It's amazing when you think about things like that, and you think about how much of an impact the digital world has on so many different industries now. But that's got to be one of the biggest changes.
Publishing, definitely, absolutely. Yeah, ebooks are a relatively new thing. It's actually something I resisted for quite a long time. I didn't get a Kindle for ages and ages and ages. I did get one eventually, and I wouldn't be without it now, because it makes it a lot easier when you're going on holiday rather than having half a suitcase full of books.
Yeah, it does. I'm like you. For a while, I was thinking, but there's the smell of the books. There's the weight of the books. There's the turning of the page, which sounds amazing.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I caught up. I stopped becoming a Luddite after a while, like you said you did as well, and decided actually for things like holidays it is perfect, because it's just light. Just slot it into one tiny part of the bag. So you started working in that company, working with the self-publishing, and as you say, that was a much harder task for 11 years working in that role. Then, where did you go next? Was it still in the self-publishing realm, or did you?
No, actually, I went to a small independent publisher in London called Robert Hale, and I was the design and production manager there. So they had what you might call an eclectic list. They had very specialist books about clocks and watches and jewellery and things like that. And they had an equestrian list as well under another imprint. And they did fiction and non-fiction in any subject you could care to mention. But the one that really astounded me was they did these Western stories under a Black Horse Western imprint. So, literally stories about cowboys and Indians.
Wow.
And the American West. And they only printed 300 copies of each book. We did, like 6 different stories every single month, but it was the print run was only 300 for each one.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Why so few copies? Just because they weren't likely to sell?
That was the market. That was the market. There was it was a very niche market, obviously. But it was one that Robert Hale catered to. In fact, weirdly, 100 copies out of those 300 were shipped out to Australia. Obviously, there was enough of a demand for Western stories down under for them to do that.
Yeah, I imagine so. And so I'm guessing there must have been enough profit in those 300 prints to make it worthwhile. Just
about, I think, yeah. Just about.
Was it more of a labour of love?
Probably, yeah. I don't think the authors got an awful lot out of it.
So you were working for Robert Hale. Were you doing a similar kind of role, or were you doing something slightly different?
Slightly different. In terms, I was commissioning artwork for covers. I was managing outside freelancers who were doing the typesetting work. Just basically managing the whole process from when I got the edited script in to signing off the printer's proofs once it got to that stage. So it's managing the whole production part of the publishing process.
Wow.
And then gradually over the years, the number of books being published slightly dwindled and they had to make some cost savings. So I started doing more of the typesetting in-house.
Okay.
And I still, absolutely love doing that. Fiction, relatively straightforward. So I generally preferred the non-fiction titles, having to could be a bit more creative with those. So, yeah.
That sounds amazing. So for people who don't understand typesetting, what is it? What does it mean? What are you doing when you say you're typesetting?
Essentially, you're taking a Word or other text file and putting it into software like InDesign, so that doing the page layout, if you like, so that it looks like the pages of a book rather than a Word file.
Right. Yeah. And so what's important when you're doing something like that? What are you looking for? I won't ask any more on that, Leslie. I'll let you answer it because your knowledge is far superior to mine. So. Oh gosh.
There's a lot to it, more than most people think. You've got to look at the hierarchy of headings, especially in non-fiction where you might have 4 or even 5 different levels of headings through the book to denote different sections. If there's any images to be included, what sort of images are they? Where do they need to be placed? What typeface is suitable for this book? The vast majority of books that I set they use a serif font for the main text, and serifs are the little curly bits on the letters, and sans serifs that don't have those for headings. And it's about making the reader's journey as easy as possible through the book so that the author's words are easily understood. And if the author is taking them on a journey, then they can follow it through because the structure has been done in that way.
It's incredible. I really I admire what you do so much, because for me, the best books are the ones where you don't notice the typesetting.
Absolutely right. If you notice the typesetting, it's because something's not quite right.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. It's sad in a way, because it means that people don't necessarily realise the importance of what you do. But at the same time, that's what makes it such an enjoyable read, because I have read books which haven't been typeset very well. And to be honest, even if the book's great, I almost give up sometimes, because... Yeah. There's a confusion. I don't know where a sentence ends and another sentence finishes properly. Even, of course, if you're reading it very closely, you can see a full stop, etc. But it's not about that. It's about usually, I personally anyway, am reading fairly quickly, and so it needs to almost just align to my eyes without me wanting
absolutely
to do
right.
anything.
Yeah. And there is a guide to the sort of like the maximum number of characters that you should have on one line, simply because the eye of the reader is going from left to right fairly quickly. You need to take them onto that next line without interrupting the flow.
With that being said, I'd like to interrupt the flow of this podcast for just a minute, so that I can remind you, you're listening to the magnificent Catherine Williams on the Storytelling with Puck podcast. A love of books from a young age has inspired her to get to where she is now, but choosing which path to take at the right time is never easy. Gladly, Catherine chose to take a path that passed by our podcast. So we're going to make sure we spend our time wisely and dig deeper into how she got to where she is today. Plus, she might even mention a little about how she helps you to self-publish your very own book. Don't forget, we'll end this episode as we end every episode with a Puck Creations story. But for now, let's get back to typesetting. Out of interest, I'm guessing it probably depends on the size of the page, but what is that maximum number of characters?
It depends on the size of the page.
I was being a bit cheeky now. I asked you that on purpose because I wanted you to say it depends. Because
it's kind of my stock answer to just about everything. It depends.
So why is that? Tell our listeners a little bit about why you so often are saying it depends when people are asking you kind of FAQ questions or asking you.
Because most questions that I get asked, it does depend. It's, they're all how long is a piece of string kind of questions. Say, my book is 43,000 words. How many pages will it be? I said, well, it depends what page size you've got. Have you got any images to be inserted as well? I've been working on a journal for somebody recently. So they've got pages that have nothing except lines for writing in them.
Right.
And although it was initially thought to be about 100 pages, it's ended up at 200 because of all of these, space that's needed for people to write in.
Yeah. So it's pretty much double the size. See, I find that really interesting because I think what happens quite often is that as much as self-publishing, as you say, is brilliant and is more accessible now, I think that a lot of people think that self-publishing is kind of a stock standard answer. You can pretty much just, whatever it is that you're writing, it doesn't matter what you're writing, you can have a template, you can follow it, and you can put it out there into the world, and it'll be fine. It doesn't need anything. But I've learned a lot from you, actually, from reading so much of what you do and how you change people's minds on this, is that it's not simple. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to think about to get it right. And that's why, as you have very eloquently put, it depends is pretty much the answer to every question.
Yeah.
which is brilliant.
I need to get a T-shirt with "It Depends" stamped on it.
Yeah. I think you should, actually. I think you could probably sell merchandise with that. However, if you get a T-shirt, I really hope that everything is completely right on the typesetting on the T-shirt. And
I'd have to guarantee it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what you were doing, and that was your kind of your later role in was sorting out things like the typesetting a big part of what you did. And then what happened afterwards? Why did you leave? Why did you stop working for them?
Sadly, Robert Hale decided to stop trading.
That is sad.
So the entire staff were made redundant. Okay. At the time, there were a few books in progress, and their list was taken over by another publisher. So I had the opportunity to finish off those books on a freelance basis for this other publisher.
Okay.
So that was kind of what started the seeds of becoming self-employed. I managed to acquire the iMac that I was using, and I'm still using it. So I was doing those books that needed to be finished on a freelance basis, and as I said, that kind of sowed the seeds. But at that point, which was end of 2015, I wasn't quite ready to actually make that jump into self-employment, because I wasn't quite sure whether the amount of work that I had was going to be sustainable. So I did end up looking for another job, and I ended up on a maternity cover contract at DK, who, as some people will know, they publish travel guides and the most wonderful children's books, books about any subject you care to mention. And I was in what they call the life division, which was the cookery and the gardening and the popular psychology and all those kind of books. It wasn't a creative role, but it was like a step between the designers and the print producers. Right. So I was checking templates and archiving the books that had been done before. All sorts of things. But as I said, it wasn't a creative role, and I really missed that. So when the contract came to an end, I'd still been doing odd bits on a freelance basis in between. Right. And frankly, by the time the contract came to an end, I had had enough of commuting into London. So that was a big impetus to starting to work from home as well.
Okay, fantastic. I think many of us have had similar experiences, and it does become quite painful commuting into London all the time. It does. I think when you're away from that as well, and you are working from home or you're working from a more local office, people will have obviously experienced that a lot more in the past year. You feel how good it is not to have to commute as well, don't you? You start to get such a sense. Yeah,
I was literally spending 3 hours a day just travelling to and from work, and I was just exhausted all the time.
I can imagine. So that led you then to the contract was over, and that was then the start of chapter 1. It
was indeed, yes, April 2017.
Okay, incredible. I'm actually looking at your lovely your lovely graphics behind you now, with chapter 1 book production and the beautiful imagery and the heart going into the heart made out of 2 pages of a book going into the center. It's wonderful. So I'm guessing when you started, as you said, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't also quite as expected, because the kinds of people you thought you might be working with, you weren't able to get the work you wanted. Why was that? What was the difference between what you expected and reality?
I guess I assumed that other traditional publishers still needed, freelance typesetters, and they do. But I guess, that there's a lot of us out there. There are lots of people who do book typesetting. Right. A lot of it gets done overseas where it's cheaper.
Uh-huh.
That was why, really. I did have a bit of a hiccup literally 2 months after starting the business, because I ended up with a pulmonary embolism and in hospital.
Wow.
And so, all the development just went completely on hold for a few months while I recovered from that.
I bet it did. So you are fully recovered now, are you? Or
yes. I mean, I'm going to be on blood thinners for the rest of my life.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, essentially fully
I
recovered.
imagine that must have been a really difficult time to go through, especially as you just decided to start up your new business. That probably didn't help matters very much. Was there, other than the actual physical pain and problems, what were your feelings going through that at the time? I don't think I can imagine, actually.
No, I had so many hospital visits and to the getting the dosage of the blood thinners right. If I'd been employed, I'd have been, taking so much time off anyway. Yeah. I figured, actually, it's just as well I'm working from home. I just gradually built up again. Got my website going and got myself onto LinkedIn because I kind of knew that was where my audience were going to be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Other people who were running their own business and like you mentioned right at the beginning, the business books market seems to have just exploded over the last couple of years. Yes. With a lot of people wanting to share their expertise in a format that is affordable and convenient for a very wide audience.
Yes.
And that's why a lot of people are now choosing to publish their own books, is because they can then reach that wider audience.
So tell me more about that, actually, because we're not quite caught up to the present day, but we're almost there. We're at the start of your first business launch, the Chapter 1 business launch. And so you mentioned the reason, I guess, that people are wanting to produce more non-fiction books. Is there a direct profit motive from the books for many of these businesses, or is there something else at play?
No, none at all. If you go into self-publishing a book with a view to making money purely from the book, you're going to be disappointed because it's self-publishing is not a cheap process. There are a lot of people that need to be involved. You've got editors and proofreaders as well as typesetters and cover designers, and those who can create the ebooks. And then you've got all the marketing and the printing. If you're doing printed versions of your book, it all costs money. But it's what that book leads on to where people make the money. So if you want to get onto the speaking circuit, or you're running a business where you've got online courses or something, and people read the book and think, that's really interesting, I found that very helpful, but I think I need a bit more assistance with whatever they're dealing with. And then they'll go back to that author and their course, and they might book on their course, or they might book one-to-one sessions with them. And that's where the money is to be made, is growing your client base from the people who've read the book.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's almost, we write so much content for our clients, and that content goes into blogs, and that content goes as website content, and longer form relationship building content is sometimes what we call it. So we give it a few different names, but that's one of the names we sometimes call it. And so that to me seems like what these books are doing to an extent, but on a much, much, much larger basis, because you're able to get them out to more people in different parts of the world. And also there's so much more content in there that hopefully, if they're a good book, people will keep on going back and opening up to different pages within the book and going, that bit of information is relevant, that bit of information is relevant. And as you say, so there might not be a direct profit off the book. There also might not even be necessarily a direct short-term win, because people will be using the book as much as they can to help them. But after a while, they might say, I need a little bit more. But now I trust this person. I've built a relationship with this author without ever meeting them.
Indeed.
That's powerful.
Yeah. Very powerful indeed. Yeah.
So I can see the attraction in that case for people to write a book. Is there anyone or any reason that people shouldn't?
Ooh. If you don't know who your book would be aimed at, it's not worth writing. You've got to know, for business books especially, you've got to know your audience,
right?
And you've got to know how to market your book. You've got to have an audience in place to sell your book to, and know that it's something that they would want.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you would hope that if you're running your business well, that you would know who your audience are.
Absolutely.
And you would know the kind of things that you could support them with. You would know the kind of questions that they're constantly asking you, and you would build that up over time. But maybe I think the key is to not do it instantly and to start building up, because you don't know all of... Well, as you said, when you first started your business, you made a couple of assumptions that weren't correct.
Yeah.
We all do that in our business. You're not
unique. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so it's probably good, I guess, to gather information over time to work out what people are asking. What kind of questions are you constantly being posed and you're having to answer individually? Yeah. That's the kind of thing we do again with blogs. We constantly ask our clients, what are people asking you? What are you having to answer all the time? And so with a book, it's similar, but you just build up a catalogue and then you put them all into a catalogue.
Exactly. Yeah.
Would you say there's something, though, to, I guess, creating a book that is maybe something we talk about quite a lot with our clients is defining their brand and helping clients to understand who they truly are, how they communicate with people, making sure that they are clear, they're consistent, they're relevant, which is really important. And this comes back to knowing your audience, and also that they're able to stand out from the crowd. One of the things, I know that one of the books that you were involved with the publishing for was our mutual friend, Trisha Lewis.
Yeah.
And one of the things I absolutely love about her book is that she did something very different. She almost brought fiction into non-fiction. She wrote stories, and the stories then knitted together through different characters to explain the business that she was actually promoting and the support that she was giving.
Yeah, no, I think it's an absolutely brilliant book, and I'm honestly not saying that just because I helped her to get it ready for publication. And she had some coaching from my business partner Helen Pollock as well to get it written. And I know that she had a wobble at one point, about whether should she actually publish it in this way. And we were both, well, yeah, absolutely, you should. It's totally unique the way that you've done it, and it is so Trisha. And that's the hallmark of a good book, because you can literally hear her reading the words in a way, and the characters that she's developed. A lot of people on LinkedIn who follow Trisha will know Investigator Lewis, but they might not be quite so familiar with Professor P, who does all the kind of the geeky sciencey stuff behind the scenes. And I love that character. Absolutely love that character. She's brilliant. But that may be because I'm a little bit geeky about typography as well. So.
Yeah, possibly. But at the same time, she's just a great character. I agree. And so I think what's powerful about that, though, is the fact that it's very unique to Trisha. And sometimes I know, because it's great that there's lots more people creating non-fiction books, but there's also sometimes a bit, from my point of view, I get a bit tired because I feel like I'm just reading the same book by a different author, if that makes sense. It's not different. It doesn't stand out. And so I don't know what your advice would be on this, but for me personally, I think that it's really important. And maybe this is because this is what we do in general as well with our clients, but it's really important to make sure that you're standing out and you're doing it your way, and you're not just doing a copy and paste of somebody else's work.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, aside from any copyright issues in doing that, you've got to do it, from your point of view, and, you're disseminating your experience and your way of doing things. They might not work for everybody, but it does work for enough
Yes, indeed. So you mentioned Helen Pollock there, and that she's your business partner. But correct me if I'm wrong. She's not your business partner in Chapter 1. She's
no,
your
that's
business
right.
partner for what's your secondary company called, and when did that start?
We started the BizBook Foundry last May, June. I connected with Helen, must be 2 years ago now, through a membership group called Atomic. And we must have been on a Zoom call with Andrew and Pete, one of their events, and they were advising people to get accountability buddies. Finding out that Helen was a book coach, and made me think, oh, right, okay, Helen would be a brilliant person to get to know. So I reached out to her and said, perhaps we could be accountability buddies. And, I'm sure our businesses have got some overlap, and we're obviously both in the book business. So, and that worked out really well. So, we'd chat every couple of weeks and see how things were getting on. And through Helen, I've had a couple of people come my way for the next stage of the self-publishing. And then we started thinking, well, why don't we kind of put the two together so that people have a one-stop shop, if you like, to get the book coaching or ghostwriting. We've got some ghostwriters on our books that we put work to as well. And it's a one-stop shop to take people right from having the idea for their book through to having all the files that they need to upload to Kindle Direct Publishing or Ingram Spark or wherever else they're getting it printed and distributed. That's
brilliant. I love that. So I'm guessing the big advantage of this is it just takes the pressure off.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. But there are a lot of people involved in publishing a book. As I mentioned earlier, there's editors and proofreaders, and you might want an index done for your book as well. So rather than an individual needing to go and find all of those different people themselves, we've got them all ready for you. So, yeah. And obviously there's a little bit of a premium to pay for that kind of service, but it saves a lot of time.
Does it almost feel a little closer to traditional publishing? It's almost a halfway house because of the level of involvement that you guys have. It's almost, if you don't want to fully self-publish because you feel a little bit alone, but the whole idea of trying to search for a traditional publisher and all of the hoops you have to go through is daunting. But actually, if you just want to pay for a service that supports you in self-publishing, to me, it feels like a bit of a halfway house.
Yeah, you could think of it like that. And certainly there are other companies around who do similar work to us. But we decided that, we were going to focus on people who wanted to put out a book as part of their business promotion.
Right. Yeah.
That hasn't stopped other clients coming to the BizBook Foundry, but that's the whole point of knowing your audience and marketing to a particular type of person.
Yes.
It's like, you're going in for the centre of the dartboard, but the rest of it's still there.
Indeed. I might steal that. I'm doing a talk about audience this evening with a group of people, and I like that line because you summed it up very well. So it sounds amazing. It sounds like a wonderful place for people to be able to get self-published, or to publish a book, but to kind of take the stress off. So if they want to do that, or if they want help just from chapter 1, if they just need that part of your work, where can people find you?
You'll mostly find me on LinkedIn. I have to be honest and say I haven't been posting as much as I used to, simply because I haven't had the time. Yeah.
But all of your contact information is on there, and so
absolutely,
superb. And what we'll also do as well, please, any listeners who don't use LinkedIn as much but still want to find Catherine, we're going to put lots of other links on the show notes so that you can see all of the different places that you can reach her. Now, before I let you go, if you still have a couple of minutes, I wanted to dig down to away from your business story to something a little bit more personal that's been going on with you recently, if you wouldn't mind, because I personally was inspired by it. For our Storytelling with Puck initiative back in February, one of the stories you posted, and I love this because we asked people to put photos on. Why don't you explain it, actually?
I posted a photo of a large stone on a set of weighing scales, which it was literally, I just said, I'll let the picture tell the story.
And it did.
And it was to mark the fact that I'd lost a stone in weight at that time. And now, at the time of recording, I'm 3.5 stone down. So that's been a lifestyle change journey.
It's incredible. 3.5 stone, for people who maybe don't use the stone and pounds, or just use pounds, that's 50 pounds, right? Or just
almost very nearly 50 pounds.
That's incredible. And then that's, I don't know, roughly 26, 27 kilograms for people who work, because I know people work in slightly different measurements. That is amazing. That is an absolutely incredible amount of weight to lose. How have you done it?
Last year, doing a lot of work on mindset.
Okay.
I worked with the brilliant Lucy Griffin-Stiff, and she helped me a lot with something that's called timeline therapy.
Okay.
And it just helped to shift a lot of stuff that I was holding on to and really didn't need to hold on to anymore. And I did a trial of an application called Noom, which is very much about the psychology as much as the actual food that you consume.
Okay.
Because with weight loss, it's more about the mindset than what you eat. It's about what you eat as well, don't get me wrong.
But your mindset helps you to change what you eat, right?
Exactly.
That's the big difference.
Yeah. Exactly.
I've genuinely found it quite inspiring. I'm starting to try and lose some weight myself, so it's got me on the right path. But I also like the fact that it's not all about diets. It's not all about the starvation diets or the Atkins diets or whatever it is. It's about changing, as you say, your mindset and changing the way that you approach things. And I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's about changing habits. I read a book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Must have been in December. And it was like the final penny dropped. That do you know what? It is never, ever too late to change your habits for healthier ones. And so, like I said, the penny dropped, and that was the start of it, really. So at the very end of December, I signed up for a full year of using Noom. I've also signed up to what's called the Wellbeing Academy with a lovely lady called Diane Brown. And that's about getting the right mindset around being more active. It's not about formal exercise or necessarily how much you do, but it's about finding something that you enjoy and wanting to be more active for your personal well-being.
Interesting. So it's about becoming less sedentary. It's not about having an exercise regime.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is incredible. I'm so impressed. And I've also absolutely loved every moment of talking to you. We didn't get to dig any more into Rebecca, which I did want to, but I would say that the recommendation that you got from Catherine at the beginning is surely enough for you all to go out and start reading/watching Rebecca. But yeah, thank you for sharing that story, and thank you for sharing your story too. It's the way that you've built up to where you are now is incredible, and also understanding more about what you do and about the self-publishing process, I think is so important for people who want to go down that road. So I really appreciate you being here, Catherine. Thank you for being a guest.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, we will, as always, finish the podcast with a story from Puck Creations. Maria felt lost. Starting the engine that morning felt right. Her foot lifted off the clutch and she started to drive. Her only need at that moment in time was to get away from the place she had called home, to try something different. After reading that life guru's column, she knew that following the signs would get her to where she wanted to be. 3 hours into her drive and Maria had seen signs everywhere. Every time she came to a crossroads, a roundabout, or a motorway junction, there were signs. There were signs for places to eat, for towns, for places to shop, for lifestyle choices, for everything. The problem was, Maria had no idea what she actually wanted. Her short-term need was fulfilled, and yes, that felt great, but working out what to do next seemed like an impossible task. Maria ended up driving home. Paul's path was clear. He could see the future and nothing could get in the way of him reaching his final destination. Up ahead, about 45 minutes into his drive, Paul saw the sign for a town he had been told was one of the most beautiful ever seen. He didn't realise he would be passing his masterpiece of architecture, design and je ne sais quoi, 3 of Paul's favourite things. Still, nothing would get in the way of his final destination. He ignored the sign and he kept on going. As he looked up, another hour into his journey, Paul saw a sign for the National Festival of Music and Dance. If there was anything better than architecture, design and je sais quoi, it was music and dance. Still, that didn't matter. Paul drove on. Upon reaching his final destination, Paul came to realise that it was nothing like he expected. Even the bits he would have enjoyed at the start of his journey seemed to have lost their sense of awe. Aliona had thought in great detail about where she wanted to be. Her final destination was a long way away, but she knew there were a few places that she could stop off in between. Feeling assured, she started her journey. Every time she passed a sign towards her destination of choice, she followed it, but she always took note of the other signs around her. Her first stop was exactly the paradise she was expecting: palm trees, white sand, and a clear blue sea. Perfect. Driving towards her next stop, Aliona was excited to see the turtles. But every time she passed a sign for dolphins, she couldn't help but wonder. Her number one rule when planning was always, plans can change. With that, she made her way to the most incredible experience of her life, and she tells the story of Flipper to her grandchildren every day. You've just been listening to the Storytelling with Puck podcast. We'll be back very soon, so make sure you subscribe and catch up on any of the episodes you've missed.